start. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the JW3 Friday briefing. Just in case there are some people that don't know me online, I'm Judy Trotter, I'm Head of Adult Education, and our guest this morning is Calev Ben Dor, who I haven't met before, but is well known to people like Raymond. So thank you, Raymond, for suggesting Calev joins us. And also friends of Paul Gross, who's done a couple of these briefings for us. Calev is a senior research associate and the deputy editor of Fathom. If you don't know Fathom, this is a good time to have a look after the session, and it's BICOM's quarterly journal. He was BICOM's director of research between 2015 and 2019. And before that, he worked in policy planning division of Israel's foreign minister, and additionally as a senior analyst in the national security team of the Reut Institute, which is a non-partisan Tel Aviv-based strategy group, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. Calev is happy to take questions, so as always, please put them in the chat so I can pose them for you in our short time together. Calev, welcome. I know this is not an easy task that we ask you, and we haven't had much time to chat and prepare. It was only a few days ago we first spoke. But do share with us what's uppermost on your mind this week and this morning, and what you'd like to share with us. Thank you, and over to you.
Great. Thank you, Judy. Good morning to everyone. And also thank you for inviting me, and thank you for attending. There are a couple of different things I was thinking about sharing. Yeah, I think I'm going to do something slightly more conceptual in some ways, and then a little bit of personal stuff as well. And I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of different visiting groups over the last 7 months or so beforehand as well. And one of the things that I've begun to think about more and more is that if we were having this conversation maybe 100+ years ago, obviously it would not be on Zoom, and we were talking about I don't like using the word Jewish problem, it doesn't sound very nice, a Jewish question. Now, what was the Jewish question 100+ years ago? In many ways, the Jewish question was, we are relatively powerless. In many places we live, we are oppressed, or we're second-class citizens. If we live in Russia, then there's pogroms. If we live in the Arab world, we've been there for a couple of thousand years, and life isn't terrible, but it's still not great. In Western Europe, we have, we've in theory been emancipated, but there's still a lot of anti-Semitism. And if we were having this conversation 100+ years ago, there would be a number of answers that ideologues would be giving about how we alleviate or solve the Jewish question. One would be staying in Europe, Buddhism. We can create kind of cultural authority in the countries where we live. One, of course, would be communism, which is very attractive to a lot of Jews for very good reasons. One might simply be to assimilate, to marry out, and hopefully within a generation or so, people might just forget that we're Jewish, and we'll be able to kind of advance in society. And I think looking back, there were two particularly successful, certainly after Hitler, after Stalin, and after the Jews in the Arab world, in Baghdad, in Algeria, in Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, etc., were expelled. There were two primarily successful answers to that question of the Jewish question. How do we live better lives as Jews, that we can be ourselves, that we can be safe, etc.? And those two answers, I would say, was as follows. One was Zion, come to Israel, create a state, and that will make us safe. And the other one, I'm speaking to a British audience, and I grew up in the UK as well, I'm going to call it America. But when I say America, I don't just mean America, I mean Western liberal democracies, the UK, Australia, Canada, etc. And again, if we want to find an answer to the question of how can we be safe and ourselves, historically, those were the two most significant, most successful answers in the 20th century. Now, this is an arguable point, but it's something that I believe. And the other thing that I believe is that a lot of people, maybe less in the UK, to be fair, I think a lot of people in America and a lot of people in Israel might have said that actually we're not even in diaspora anymore, as in Israel is a new reality of Jewish living. It is different from what was before. And a lot of people in America may also have said that, yeah, maybe technically we're in diaspora, but actually this is the most, also arguably, this is the most successful diaspora Jews have ever had. We're very well integrated, we're very successful, we can be ourselves, the culture welcomes us, and we don't feel like we are in Galut, we don't feel like we're in exile. Now, again, British Jews probably would not have said that, but the America answer of Western liberal democracies is keeping us safe, I think is more or less proven itself. And I think to many people, when we would talk about Jewish history, so when we would sit around the Seder table and we would say, obviously there's different generations in this Zoom, but when we would say, in every generation people stand up to destroy us, so I would think, okay, yeah, in my grandparents' time, that was true. And yeah, okay, there's people who don't really like us, but we've moved into a new time. We've moved into a new era. What was is no longer. And what I've been thinking about a lot is that actually October the 7th doesn't destroy, doesn't collapse, but it undermines, again, this is my personal opinion, it undermines the success both of the Zion answer and the success of the Western liberal democracy answer. Tell you just a couple of stories. So I don't know if you've come across them, there's a very quirky fiction writer, Israeli fiction writer called Edgar Keret, who writes short stories. I just only recommend it's a certain taste, it's an acquired taste, but it's very interesting. And once I heard Edgar speak, and he was telling a joke, he said, I had a classic Israeli education. What does that mean? He said, it means that at the end of high school, I could tell you every place in Europe where a pogrom happened, but I never knew that Kafka was Jewish. Now, what does that mean? It means that a classic Israeli education is Israel good, Israel safe, Israel secure. Diaspora, that's where bad things happen. That's where pogroms happen. And there's a very kind of classic pogrom that takes center stage in early Zionist thinking that takes place in Kishinev in 1903. And Vladimir Jabotinsky writes about it afterwards. He writes a fictional account. He says, I went to Kishinev and I found this torn Torah scroll. I picked it up, one of the pieces, and I looked at one of the pieces, and it said on it, Be'eretz Nochriya, in a foreign land. And a classic Zionist perspective was that pogroms happen in foreign lands. But those stories that maybe all of us grew up hearing of kind of massacres and, children hiding under the dead bodies of their parents or playing dead, all of these things, we, in inverted commas, thought was firstly something that happened in the past, doesn't happen now, because Jewish history has changed, and it certainly does not happen in Israel, because that's changed now. And one of the things that October the 7th did, in my opinion, was it undermined that to a certain extent. Now, listen, the army come in the end, and there are many, many, many stories of intense heroism of men and women and children, Jews and Arabs, on the day of October the 7th. A huge number of heroic stories. I'm actually reading a book at the moment. It's called Yom Echad B'October, One Day in October, and it is a list of 40 stories all very moving, all that lead me to think, would I be heroic? What would I do in those situations? And it really makes me think that, we say and Mordechai says to Esther, Umi yodea im la'et kazot higat malchut. And who knows if at this moment you got to the position you were? Who knows if one day we will be called upon in our lives to do one special thing? Who knows? And if we are, who knows if we will be worthy of that? I think about that a lot. And I'm not particularly optimistic about myself either, but I think about it a lot. The point is that after the Holocaust, one of the answers of how do we stay safe was sovereign state with an army. That's what keeps us safe. Now, again, there's Iran, there's Hezbollah, there's Hamas, there's people who don't like us, there's terror attacks, etc. But broadly, that's what keeps us safe, and that is what has kept us safe in the past. Micha Goodman, who's an Israeli public intellectual, says that October the 7th was a wake-up call from Jewish history. But I think many of us, and I would include myself in this, we felt we'd moved into a new reality, and we were very, very violently and suddenly pulled back into Jewish history. That is the challenge for Israel. Then there's a challenge for America. And by America, I would also humbly suggest that the UK is included in this. And you know this better than me. It's easy to forget now because we're 7 months on. But Dara Horn, whose famous book talks about people love dead Jews. But you know what? Sometimes even dead Jews people don't like. Because on the 7th and the 8th of October, this is not a question about civilian casualties and is it disproportionate and should Israel, yes, go into Rafah or no, go into Rafah. This is on the 7th and the 8th of October. There are people who are celebrating the murder of Jews. There are university societies at Harvard who on the 7th are putting out statements saying we will hold the Israeli state solely responsible for any violence that happens. The second answer to what keeps Jews safe in a post-Holocaust world, the first answer was a sovereign state with an army, is a discourse of human rights in a free society where, yes, of course, there'll be anti-Semitism because it's not going to disappear. But if we live in free Western liberal societies, we will be kept safe and we will have allies, our peers who we work with. I mean, the number of my friends in the UK who said they felt bitterly disappointed by their professional peers in the aftermath there were just so many. And there's another quite depressing article. One of those articles where the title says what it means. The end is written by Franklin Foer. The end of the golden age. The golden age of American Jews is over. Now, again, this is an arguable point. I grew up in the UK. I'm not sure if or when there was a golden age for British Jews. But in America, there very much was a golden age. And he basically argues that the two most up-and-coming movements in the US, one is MAGA, Make America Great Again, and the other is this kind of progressive wokeism, both of which I would say don't particularly like Jews. And they're both undermining this post-Second World War consensus that allowed Jews to thrive for many years. This is a big challenge. This is a challenge for Jews who live in Israel. It's a challenge for Jews who live in Western liberal democracies. And those were the two most successful answers in the 20th century for what it means to be to successfully living as a free and safe Jew. That's one thing I'm thinking about. And then I'm thinking about at what stage does one's children be brought in to this challenge of being Jewish? Essentially, this challenge of being Jewish that maybe we didn't think was as challenging as it is. So I'm lucky in the sense that I've got young kids. I've got a 7-year-old and an almost 4-year-old. And every day on our way to school and kindergarten, we walk past pictures of the hostages, and they never really notice it. They never really ask about it. There's actually, and we're also lucky in the sense that, again, because if we had older kids, they would obviously know. And actually, my 7-year-old goes to a school where it's only first grade. It's a growing school. It's a new school. So there's not even older children to talk about it. And the other day, we were walking home with a friend of hers, and as we passed the pictures, so this friend is saying, "Elu chatufim, ve'elu chatufim, ve'elu chatufim." Chatufim are people who've been kidnapped, hostages. These are hostages, and these are hostages, and these are hostages. And I'm thinking, what does my 7-year-old understand? What does she get? What does that even mean? How do you even begin to talk to someone about that? And my hope was that being in Israel, again, listen, there's other challenges. Obviously, Israel is no walk in the park, and again, there's dangers, etc. But I really think that there was this feeling that we have left a stage of Israeli history where children need to hide under their parents' dead bodies. I generally feel like many of us thought we'd left that in the past, but we haven't left it in the past. And then what does that mean as a responsible parent for how you educate your children about the responsibilities and the dangers in the 21st century of being Jewish? This is something I think about a huge amount. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago. It was a type of diary piece, and I said that on our way to gymnastics, we passed by a picture of the hostages, of the mother, the Bibas family, the 2 young children, and the mother. The father is also still being held captive. And in some ways, I'm kind of a bit embarrassed even to look at them, because I feel like our as a country's failure to bring them back is much larger than just a failure of a country's responsibility to its citizens. It touches into something deep within Jewish history that I felt we'd left behind. So these are just some of the things that I'm, not every moment of the day, obviously, but something I think about a lot. The weight of Jewish history, and how we in the 21st century are in a place that I think many of us didn't think we would be in, and what does that quite mean? I've got many other things that I could potentially share, but I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, and then if there are no other questions, then I can raise another couple points. So that by means of introductory comments.
Thank you so much, Calev. That was such an interesting way of looking at it, and to hear what you're thinking, and to hear that historical connection is fascinating. Our first question's not quite directly, but not indirect. So Jacqueline asks, how do we stay safe from the international attempts to boycott Israel?
How do we stay safe
from the international attempts to boycott Israel?
It's a great question. I'm not sure I've got a great answer. I think Israelis have this kind of dual nature with regard to the international community. That on the one hand, there's a number of kind of early Zionist sayings that in some ways are very, someone's quite ambivalent towards what the diplomatic situation of Israel is. So Ben Gurion's got this, it's a bit politically correct these days, but Ben Gurion used to say, it doesn't matter what the Goyim say, it matters what the Jews do. And it comes from a very deep place of, now we've got a state, you were always critical, and now we don't need to worry about you. And the UN in Hebrew is and people, you say shmum, like, who cares about what the UN say? And I think that there's one component of Israel that says, we don't care. And there's another component, which is we want to be loved, and we want to be hugged, we want to be embraced, and Eden Golan and Eurovision is this huge success, and we're super happy about it. And I think Israelis are in both. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot, and it's intellectually interesting, but ultimately it's irrelevant because it's not the path taken. How does the war look and the international response to it look if there's another government fighting it? So if it's not a Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, Smotrich government, how does the war look? To what extent is it the same, and to what extent is it different? To what extent is the response of the world the same or different? Now, I don't know how many people are on this Zoom, but how many people there are, we can have lots and lots of different opinions. I would assume that, I feel this as well. If we all spent a week arguing on Twitter about how young children were brutally murdered on October the 7th, and you bring the evidence, but there's arguments, there's this, there's that. We spend a week doing that, arguing about the levels of brutality, whether it's 95 out of 100 or 102 out of 100. But then within 2 minutes of an explosion going off outside a hospital, everyone's reporting that 500 people have been killed. Then I'm not really sure what more we can do. That's one component. And I think that this war has really been fought under a microscope that has not existed in any other international conflict at all. And suddenly everyone's an expert in international humanitarian law, on the one hand. On the other hand, I wonder whether our relationship with Biden, statements from cabinet ministers talking about nuking Gaza or starving people or whatever, you take out the pyromaniacs out of the government, and you take out the tension with Biden, and you, just have I was going to say a better plan for the day after, but it's not even a better plan. You voice a plan for the day after. How does that shift things? Now, again, I don't know. And I was in the car on the way to playing football 2 days ago, and someone had this discussion. Whatever we do, they hate us. It's not, et cetera, et cetera. And then you think, okay, but to what extent are we maybe making things harder for ourselves? So I don't know to what extent that is an answer. How do we stay safe from the world? I think Israel does have allies. I think America is an ally. I think the Western world is an ally. There's allies in the Arab world as well. I think we need to work better with that. I think civil society is particularly difficult. And I think there's certain things where maybe we could help ourselves more. And then there's certain things that even with, the kind of more centrist or even like a left wing, whatever that means, government, you would still have the Harvard people marching in the Harvard campus, marching in the street, shouting from the river to the sea, and maybe even talking about genocide. So I don't know to what extent I've answered the question, but those are kind of some thoughts.
So just to add, I'm not exactly sure whether Jacqueline was also referring to this, but we have Seret on at the moment, which was the Israeli Film Festival, I think only in London. And of course, there's been protesters outside. And last night, there was an Israeli-UK counter-protest, which swamped the anti-film protesters and actually made them move away. And there was, from what I gathered on Facebook, I was not there, it gave an enormous surge of pride on the one hand, and, oh, we can do something. This feeling of we don't just need to sit and social media. And I don't know whether that news got through to Israel or yet, because it's quite new. But we have obviously these questions here of how much are we making more of it by having it all over social media, and actually is there as much as it sounds there is? People are starting to talk about being scared of coming here. People are looking at moving away, and of course some people are, but the majority of us continue on a day-to-day basis in a normal way. So I think that's part of it, and I get that feeling in Israel as well. I think you mentioned in your article, and other people have said on Friday mornings, that all the restaurants and cafes are absolutely full. People are out. You're mentioning playing football, that normal activities have resumed. But of course, behind that, there is this depression and worry and what next feelings from North and South. Would that be a fair summing up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, listen, there's also circles of trauma as well. Yes, there's people who lost their lives, can lose their lives. They were brutally murdered. There's people who are hostages, and then there's you know, almost 100,000 people who've been out of their homes for the last 7 months, and then there's just lots and lots and lots of families where the dad is away because he's fighting, and that is, you know, again, no one's injured, no one's killed, it's just an absent member of the family who's in danger. And what does that do to the husband? What does it do to the wife? What does it do to the children? There are waves of trauma and difficulty that I don't think have even begun to fully wash over people. And yeah, and then you have the cafes. I mean, I don't know if anyone visited here in the last 7 months, but in Dizengoff Square in Tel Aviv, it's very interesting. It's kind of been made into this memorial for people who were killed on October the 7th. And there's lots of pictures, and there's candles, and there's teddy bears, etc. But then around it are cafes, and people are sitting there. And I guess, you know, this is also part of people's just day-to-day lives, because what else are they going to do? But it's challenging here, and it's challenging outside for similar but different reasons. And I think this goes back to the idea that many of our assumptions about what the world was like, both in Israel and the UK, America, etc., have been, again, I don't know if they've been collapsed, but they've been pretty badly undermined. So we're all just trying to work out what to do next.
So Kay comments that obviously when Iran attacked with the rockets, and France, UK, US, and Jordan came to our aid, that was, you know, both horrible and, oh well, at least we are still feeling a little bit protected there. And meanwhile, in Israel society, you know, we've gone from all those protests from pre-7th of October, but they are coming back again. So she also asks, do you think at this point Israel society is more divided than ever? Or because there was this feeling after the 7th that everybody came together, and the protesters moved into supplying food and help, whatever support was needed. What's the feeling now with that? In the 2 minutes we have left.
I was going to say, so this is a 1.5 minute answer. I have a very optimistic scenario and a very pessimistic scenario, and I'll try to give both. And I don't know which way we're going to go. The pessimistic scenario, we'll start with the pessimistic one. The pessimistic scenario goes as follows: you ask a right winger, how did we get here? And the right winger basically says, I told you so. I told you this would be a disaster, to leave Gaza, to give them sovereignty, to give them weapons. I told you, and I was right. You ask a centre-left Israeli, how do we get here? They say, I told you so. I told you that spending 8 months dealing with this ridiculous kind of, you might call it judicial reform, I'll call it constitutional coup, when the defense minister and military intelligence are warning that it undermines Israeli deterrence, and you're strengthening Hamas and you're giving them money. I told you this would end in disaster. I told you, and I was right. If after the largest number of murdered Jews since the Holocaust in one day, each of us goes back to, I was right, I think we've got a problem. And then we're going back to October the 6th discourse. And I'll tell you, I couldn't imagine October the 7th, but that scenario I can very, very easily imagine. That is a pessimistic scenario. We go back to how we were. The optimistic scenario is that there are 4 tribes in Israel. As the former President Rivlin talked about, secular, national religious, Arab, Haredi. And the secular and the national religious, again, each of which have different values and priorities, and they feel their way of life is under threat, etc. The secular and the national religious have basically been brothers and sisters in arms for the last 7 months. They've been fighting with one another. They've given up their lives for one another. The optimistic scenario says there's no way you can go back to what was before after you have fought for so long with a member of a different tribe in the same tank. We've got two other tribes. We've got the Arab tribe, which is also very interesting, and obviously it has different components. Arab Israelis report saying after October the 7th, they felt more proud to be Israeli. And there were several Arabs who were brutally murdered on October the 7th by Hamas. There were some who were taken hostage as well. They see what's over the border, and they do not want that. So that will also be a significant change. Then we get to the Haredim, and the truth is, I don't know which direction it's going to go in. There are some people who would say there's no going back, we need to change. There's other people who listen, it's a deeply conservative society. We don't change, we learn Torah, that's what protects. But from Israeli society, that's no longer good enough. But at least 3 of those 4 tribes, I believe, again, the optimistic scenario is, cannot but fail to have been significantly changed. And so hopefully we can move into, on the day after the war, whatever that means, we can move into a new type of discourse within Israeli society. Now, it could go either way. It could easily go either way. But I think that those are 2 kind of scenarios that I have in my head.
Yes, I think the thing that is for sure is that we just don't know.
I'll just say one last thing, Judy. There's so many comparisons that people like to make about October the 7th. It's like Pearl Harbor, it's not like 9/11, it's like the pogroms, it's like 1948, and a lot of people talk about 73, the Yom Kippur War, because of the intelligence failure. But there's another way in which 73 is very, very useful as a model, in my opinion. Firstly, because after 73, the government tries to blame the army, and many of the top brass of the army are forced to resign. But ultimately, within a few years, the people throw out the government. Labour loses strength, and then it loses power for the first time in 40 years. And 73 also signifies this generational change within Israel, politically, socially, economically, all different ways. We are at the beginning of something that will take many, many years to play out. And we don't yet know how it's going to go, but I think we can probably say things won't be as they were before.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Calev. As David said, it's an excellent presentation. You're so natural.
Thank you very much.
And what you say speaks to us so much. So thank you. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone, for coming, as always. And a reminder to keep coming to JW3 and support us. And through that, Israel, we still have the Love Locks padlocks, and there's about to be a new some artists are coming in to do some padlocks, which will be on the other side of the bridge. So thank you. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom and a safe weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all next Friday. Calev, thank you. Look forward to seeing you.
Thank you, Judy.
Know if you're coming in, and we can
Great.
have
An absolute pleasure. Be well, everyone. Shabbat Shalom.
Take care, everyone. Bye.